All right, we're live with the newest episode of We the Individuals Live, where we believe in the novel proposal that we each choose our own manner of being governed. With us, as always, is Jeff Peterson II, the founder of We the Individuals, and we have back with us today Will Tippins, who seems to be having some connections issue. I'm not getting your video feed right now, Will, but I'm sure he'll be jumping in if his connection gets fixed. If not, we'll just move on without him. And it is our absolute pleasure today to introduce Sean Malone, who is the director, writer, and editor of the documentary Farming in Fear, as well as doing some work with some of Reason's other videos. A lot of libertarians have seen these Remy music videos. He's worked on those, and I hope we're going to dive into some of what else you've done, because I'm not sure what all has your name on it, but I'm certain that I'm missing some of it, Sean. So first off, we cannot see you, Will. Just jump back in when everything's working so we can move along. But first off, I watched your documentary last night, Farming in Fear, Sean. It was, I don't want to say good because it just pissed me off, but it was very well done. It did its job, right? Because it pissed me off. But I noticed in the credits that it was produced by the Koch brothers, which means all of us in the libertarian community that have to hear every day about all the Koch money we're supposedly being paid, and you're actually getting Koch money. Why should we trust you when you're being paid by the completely unscrupulous Koch brothers?
Well, I mean, I've been at the Koch Institute as creative media producer for the Koch Institute for about over 4 years now, actually. And what I think people don't sort of understand about a lot of this kind of stuff is that, and this is actually really funny to me when people say, "Oh, this is produced by the quote Koch brothers." First of all, I only work for one of them. I don't work for both of them. They're not conjoined twins or anything. They do separate things. But more importantly, I mean, the Honest Enterprise Project, which Farming in Fear is on, as well as two other documentaries, Locked Out and No Van's Land, one of which is about Jamaican immigrant van drivers in New York City who are kind of getting screwed in the way that Uber is getting screwed now, but in the 80s and 90s. And then Locked Out, which is about the first fully licensed hair braider to work in Mississippi, knocking down occupational licensing laws through the help of IJ and groups like that. But these are passion projects for me. I mean, there are things that I had to fight for. My day job as creative media producer is a lot less interesting than I think a lot of people would imagine. I mean, there are a lot of aspects of it that are really enjoyable, but we do a lot of policy events and things like that. So my team tends to do, a lot of event videography, a lot of recruiting videos, a lot of sort of promotional things like that. But peppered in there, I get to do a lot of documentary projects. The most recent one that I've done, actually, and I actually want to expand this from its 8-minute version to something maybe a little bit longer than this, is a piece that we were able to shoot inside a prison about a program called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, which teaches inmates who are within 3 years of release entrepreneurial skills. They basically do sort of a Shark Tank business plan competition, and then they have group homes and stuff when transitional homes, I should say, when the guys get out, and all of that done with Charles Koch's money. So I feel actually particularly lucky to have the opportunity to tell the kind of stories that I think are really, really important. But Charles is not in the office day to day. He's got other stuff to do. So, I think the thing that's always amused me is that people don't understand that everybody I work with, and I work with about 200 other people, sincerely cares about this stuff, and we're just lucky enough to find somebody who's willing to actually sink some money into these kinds of issues. So I'm actually thrilled about it, but I understand people are pretty critical sometimes. So.
And just so my sarcasm's clear, I've got a bunch of friends that work for the Koch Institute. I think they do wonderful things. Yeah. I tend to defend them. You find me good evidence to hate them, I'll hate them, but I haven't actually seen it. yet. So I just thought that was funny. I always like finding you guys that have Coke money there. Okay, like
You know,
Coke money. Yeah.
I can't use the argument. They've never cut me a check before, but I mean, I used to be able to say that. I was doing the same stuff before I worked for them. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on my Coke handout for being a libertarian patsy. So
hey, man,
if you can hook me up with that.
There's this meme that kind of goes around the internet that you'll see that actually Craig Lively, he's the guy that does all the graphics, but it actually has a guy on a skeleton sitting on a bench saying "Still waiting on my Coke money." And,
Yeah. So some of us are actually so lucky as to get it. Anyway, moving on. I just wanted to open up with a little funny icebreaker, but this Farming in Fear is a much more serious project. We've all watched it here, but I want you to give everybody the rundown if you can. By the way, everybody should watch this documentary. Tell us what it's about.
Man, I would hope everybody watches it. It's been out now publicly for a couple months, so I'm glad to see it starting to get some traction. Actually,
you can watch it on YouTube, by the way. You don't have to buy it or anything.
I'll just do the plug now, and maybe if you guys want to link to it later. But honestenterprise.tv is probably the easiest, quickest way to get there, or youtube.com/honestenterprisetv. It's pretty easy to find. But I actually just got back from Nashville where I did a screening with it. So we've been doing some stuff, and we hope to do actually a lot more soon. But to answer your question, or to sort of give your viewers, listeners, whatever, like a chance to kind of know what it's about, it's the story of a lot of abuse of power and corruption at the local level in Fauquier County, Virginia, which is actually not too far from D.C. It's about an hour and a half outside of D.C. And a woman that I had met several years ago, named Martha Bonetta, bought this small 64-acre organic. Well, it's nothing. I mean, it was a 64-acre rundown, what used to be a farm, that she turned into an organic sort of free-range farm that she just wanted to set up a little farm and take in some rescued animals and stuff like that. And she's a working farmer. But the minute that she started having people out to her property to actually buy the stuff that she made and stuff that her friends and neighbors made that she would sell out of her farmhouse, there was immediate backlash from the local government, largely in collusion with a former owner of the land who's a big real estate guy in the area and also sort of a neighbor, and an environmental group that has a pretty lengthy history of shutting down any kind of commercial activity in the area, and then the county itself, which used zoning regulations and various kinds of local ordinances to really harass her for about 10 years. And it took until very recently, until just last year, 2014, not this year, but for her to actually get a law changed in the state that protected her right to earn a living. So it's a pretty fascinating case. It's a really complicated case, but it's, I think, a really good example of what can happen when you have any level of concentrated power that can get abused. So I would definitely hope people check it out.
I think everybody should. I was telling the guys beforehand, it reminded me a lot of the book Government Bullies by Rand Paul, and I know I can never say his name positively to dogmatic libertarians like our audience, but it's a book that's much like that for me. It's just all these anecdotal examples of the government being entirely tyrannical, entirely corrupt, and the way it affects individuals that are not anarchists, that are not libertarians, that just have no, like some of the wording that I remember in the documentary was, I didn't know we were doing anything wrong. And then the lady says, and really, I don't think I was doing anything wrong, almost as if it's an afterthought, because these people haven't thought about these philosophical views. And sometimes I feel like those arguments, I mean, they have a bigger impact on the wider population than the aggregate data and the statistics we like to cite,
Absolutely.
Because it's emotional, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like the reason that I started doing this kind of stuff in the first place, about 6 years ago now, was that I was living in Los Angeles, and I was living with a great friend of mine from college who'd moved out there and who's a film editor. and he was working for a company that did movie trailers and that kind of thing. And they had gotten approached just because of their relationships by Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary. I think she was Secretary of State at the time. It would have been 2009-ish, so I'm pretty sure she was either I think she was Secretary of State by then. In any case, State Department had paid this company a lot of money, as I understand it, to make basically a 4-minute video that I think was about water rights in Africa, and it was basically, give the government more money so we can do more, more government aid, more government programs to solve these problems. And I remember seeing this thing thinking, this is amazing that it's, a couple $100,000 probably easily spent on this thing. Matt Damon narrated it. It cracked me up. Beautiful score, beautiful imagery, probably mostly stock footage and stuff like that. It's pretty simple to make as far as that kind of thing goes, but really well done, and basically arguing for more government, more government programming that would, and taxpayer-funded programs to solve various world problems. And then I would literally turn around. I saw this, and then I went back to looking at Cato and the Mises Institute, and I mean, God, there was barely anybody doing anything at all. Reason TV had just barely started at that point, maybe a year or two old, or at least that anybody really was watching.
Sure. And
all I would find, other than Reason, all I would find were back of the room videography of an hour-and-a-half lecture by an economics professor. And it's like, on the one hand, you've got gorgeous cinematography and Matt Damon, and on the other side, you have Walter Block, at best Walter Block, because Walter Block can at least be sort of entertaining. And at worst, like the most boring person in the world on a crappy handy cam, at the back of the room. And I just thought, man, like, there's got to be a better... there's got to be somebody who's doing more than this, and it turned out that there weren't. I mean, there were a handful of guys at Reason. I would say at the time there were probably only, gosh, I don't know, under 10 guys. I mean, certainly under 10 that I could name that were really doing anything for advancing libertarian, classical liberal ideas in a way that I thought was at all effective. So, I think that all the charts and graphs in the world just don't tend to convince people of anything. You really, something that David Mamet, the playwright, said, and I'm going to paraphrase this because I don't have it in front of me, but what comes from the heart goes to the heart. What comes from the head goes to the head and is seen as manipulative. Which I think is really, I'll maybe pull the quote, or maybe that'll be my book reference for later. But the idea, though, is that if you want people to care, you have to give them something to care about. And they just don't. I mean, if you intellectualize something, which I think is important too, but if you intellectualize it, it starts the opportunity for a debate rather than an opportunity for a conversation, I guess. People are immediately looking for ways to tear down your facts, tear down your logic and your reasoning, tear down your arguments. But if you show them a real human being who's been affected by some of this stuff, there's not a lot you can, unless you're completely heartless, like, it's hard to start from a place of, that's bullshit.
Right.
I'm absolutely going to argue this point right now, because if you look at Martha and what happened to her in Farming in Fear, or if you look at what happened to any of the other subjects of films that I've done, really hard to look those people in the eye and say that what happened to them didn't happen to them.
Yeah. And it's going to appeal to people that haven't thought of these. We libertarians, we like to be the smartest people in the room. We're well-read. We're very confident in our knowledge, and we're going to talk about epistemology and praxeology and all that, and that's great, and I love that. That's what appeals to me. But at the end of the day, that's going to reach 1% of 1% of the population. And then a documentary like what you're doing, one of the ones we were talking about from Reason earlier was this libertarian Star Wars video Reason has made. Everybody hasn't watched that, watch it. It's hilarious.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that's going to reach such a wide audience that it's going to do more good than all the academic arguments that we can make combined. I think.
Well, the thing is, I think, and I don't want to throw the academic stuff under the bus, because I think that's all incredibly important to have, and it's certainly important to be able to back what you're saying with all of those arguments. But to your point, I mean, you use the word praxeology, right? I mean, like, wow, like it's a $200 word to begin with. It's something that was used by Hayek and Mises and basically no one else.
It's obscure enough that my spell checker thinks it's wrong.
Sure. And so the idea that you could have that conversation with somebody who not only doesn't agree with you, but maybe doesn't have any idea what you think at all. I mean, like, it's just really unreasonable to start there. What is reasonable, though, is to assume that your audience is made up of interested, fairly intelligent, well-meaning people, but that they haven't heard some of these arguments, and to provide them an example that goes to their hearts, at least that's I always think that that's the right approach. But that is to say, I have a ton of respect for. I've worked with, professors and academics for so long at this point. I have a ton of respect for what they do. It's just, I think that if you want to reach people who are not academics, which we really do and we really need,
exactly,
then yeah, we'd absolutely need to get out of that bubble of just talking in the most dense terms we can.
Economies and these types. Go ahead, Jeff.
You touched base on an interesting point, and I love the Mises Institute more than anything, and one thing that I can't help but agree with your argument when I see institutions like Learn Liberty and Reason. They have, especially in this time, there's that saying that people live in like 30-second clips or something like that. I'm not sure the exact term, but I'll go into Learn Liberty and I'll go into Reason, and ideologically and economically, I'm not necessarily in agreement with Learn Liberty because they have some professors that I don't agree with, and Reason is a little bit. They're a little bit more limited government libertarian. However, their videos are entertaining, and sometimes like Learn Liberty, they're illustrated and they're graphic. There's animation, things like that.
Doing one of those right now, actually.
Yeah, and I love the Mises Institute, and I think what they have to say is true. But I think the Mises Institute could actually work and learn from Reason and Learn Liberty by producing the content in the same ways that they do. Because when I go and watch a video, it's like, I'm not going to name any names, but it's them in front of a Mises banner talking about the business cycle. I'm like, oh God.
Well, and I mean, this goes back, 5 or 6 years now. But I mean, I personally tried to get them to do more of that kind of stuff years and years ago. At the time, I was working with Jeff Tucker, and he seemed to be. I know you guys have had him on your show. I think that's what you just said, right?
A couple weeks ago.
I mean, Jeff's such a wonderful guy, but like, I think he got it. But I don't know that anybody else there necessarily did. And I think that some of that, I think that there is a little bit of a rejection on the part of some in our space where I think I'm just speculating here, but I think there's some aspect of it where people don't want to let anybody into the club, because you have your little in-group, and you don't want, outsiders coming in. And I think we've seen that a little bit, too, with, obviously Ron Paul had brought in a lot of people who are now, I'm sure you guys know some people who kind of you thought maybe they came to the liberty movement, so to speak, with Ron Paul, and now they're maybe Sanders fans, or they're talking about voting for Hillary or somebody like that, where, or Republicans, I guess. I haven't heard that as much, but so I think there's some sense of like posers and fake, fake adherence to these ideas and stuff like that, where I wouldn't have that problem. I more look at it as opportunities to start conversations, and if people don't buy everything, then let's try harder and find better ways of reaching,
If I can interject real quick, I think when you're talking about how Jeffrey Tucker is one of the few people who, as you were saying, I think understands the presentation aspect of getting a message across, which really, I mean, when you're trying to reach people who are, unacquainted with your philosophy or your economics, which once again we're maybe 1% of the 1%. It's pretty esoteric stuff. So you have to find a way to make property rights and freedom and liberty a nonpartisan issue that can just appeal to John Everyman. It's people like John Stossel and the people that really got me start questioning really getting interested in liberty were people like Penn Jillette and watching Penn and Teller and back in whenever that was, the early 2000s. So so I mean it's just, to me, and that's the most difficult thing, of course, is finding a way to without sacrificing the message, make it so that it's palatable to the most the broadest audience. And Jeff Tucker is excellent at that.
Yeah, one of the things that Jeff and I agree on really, really strongly, I think, is the idea of trying, and I guess Farming Fear is not exactly a perfect case study in this point, but Jeff and I really, really do agree on positivity as a tool for talking to people about this stuff. And one of the things that I used to say, in fact, it's on, I have a little list of like good rules for creating a YouTube show and kind of doing YouTube work. But one of the top things on that list is to be positive and to offer people solutions and hope and things like that instead of doom, gloom, and despair. And I think that for a long time,
I think Jeff Tucker nails that more than any other libertarian figure I know.
I mean, yeah, who else can be so positive about McDonald's?
To an extent, I can't even fathom most of the time. Like, I feel like I'm a fairly positive person, and even with the documentaries, as heartbreaking a lot of the stuff that happened to Martha was, I mean, it still has a happy ending, and it's still offering. I mean, really, the point that I'd like people to walk away from, at least one of the points anyway, is that if you persevere, you can actually win, right? You can actually take on these forces and succeed, which Martha did, which Melanie Armstrong did in Locked Out. I mean, Melanie got a hair braiding licensing in Mississippi was what is basically at the time was the equivalent of $20,000 today, just based on the amount of money you'd have to pay to go through the training programs that were, of course, all run by members of the Board of Cosmetology who controlled the licensing, right? $20,000, 2 years, I think, of her life, trained to do cosmetology work, which didn't do anything in the way of training somebody on how to braid hair. So you had to, if you wanted to be a hair braider specifically, the cosmetology degree didn't even teach you the skills you needed. It just gave you the right, or privilege, I guess I should say, of being allowed by the state to be a hair braider professionally. And Melanie got that taken down to $25 in what is essentially a perfunctory form that you fill out and say, I'm registered now as a hair braider in Mississippi. I mean, it's not anarchist utopia, but
there's 100 libertarians watching this right now that go, you gotta fill out a form to braid hair, but
you do have to fill out a form, but I mean, my God, if you look at that compared to you've got to spend 2 years of your life,
absolutely,
it doesn't teach you anything about what you're doing. and pay tens of thousands of dollars to do this, I mean, I know which world I want to live in, you know, and also the other thing that I think too is that if you keep providing these positive examples, I think they can be hopeful, like they can be inspiring for other people, but it also gives us the opportunity to take a breath for a second and say, look, this person succeeded and the world didn't explode, right? Like, we now have $25 hair braiding license, and things have been great. Mississippi has become a hub of that work. People moved in from Tennessee because Tennessee is terrible about that kind of stuff still. So people moved over from Memphis into Mississippi just to do that work. Like, at that point, you can either stop there or a little while later on, maybe, hopefully, you can say, hey, this is $25. Maybe we don't even need to do that. Maybe we just let people do their thing, and maybe that's okay, too.
I think...
But, yeah, anyway.
No, I think that's the hair braiding is kind of, a minimal example, but it's also, it provides a perfect illustration for if it could be done in hair, then, I mean, obviously people aren't going into Mississippi, and these entrepreneurs aren't purposely ruining people's hair for the sake of profit. So if that could be done in the instance of hair, why can't it be done in the medical profession?
You're not.
What was that, Chris?
I was saying they're not purposely ruining people's hair for profit because we're regulating it.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, well, see, and that's honestly, there's so many. I think I got into some of this stuff just by being a little wonky about. I mean, I think a lot of us do, but the economic side of it. But maybe for me, it largely just comes down to reasoning that just never made any damn sense. You know, I mean, like the idea that somebody was going to earn a living consistently over a long period of time and build a large-scale business on ruining people's lives bit by bit, like. I can't think of anywhere that I've ever seen that work outside of the state. Nowhere does that work. The DMV continues indefinitely, right? Cops continue pulling people over for nothing indefinitely, and they'll never be fired for that. But my God, if I tried to do, any of those kinds of things, I mean, hell, I'd be in jail. But, I mean, like, if I tried to do that as a business, like, if my business plan was just to cheat you out of a couple bucks, how long is that going to last?
Right.
The idea that there are so many people out there that actually think that that's a strategy that's consistently employed in markets has always kind of baffled me. So one of the things that really got me fascinated about doing this in terms of doing video and other creative media pieces about that was really to show the benefits of exchange and human interaction and just trade in general, and the idea that trade is something that benefits everybody's lives in ways that we don't usually pay attention to at all.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey Tucker's Anarchy in Action, right, to kind of bring up his perspective. Okay, so let's talk about something that we've kind of touched on that I want to go into a little bit more detail about, which is essentially this libertarian activism, which has gotten very popular. You're a successful example of that with these videos. There's a lot of people that want to be activists. The fact is, the market for activists is a lot smaller than the desire for people to be activists. But what I'm concerned with that a little bit, but I'm actually more concerned with something that we already talked a little bit about. How do we bridge the gap between this mass circulating media, these videos that get our foot in the door, that speak to people's hearts, like from the heart to the heart, like you were saying? How do we translate that into from the brain to the brain? Because I do feel like that element's necessary to avoid this transition from I voted for Ron Paul in 2012 and Bernie Sanders in 2016, Like, that's where that comes from, I believe.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to have the best answer to that question because I do think there's an aspect of it where I think it's just very difficult. I mean, there is a just natively going to be a much smaller percentage of people who go, oh my God, I care about Martha Bonetta's story, and then immediately turn around and, say, okay, well, I only care about her story because she's an organic farmer, but Monsanto can go to hell, and I'm going to do everything I can to destroy Monsanto's property rights at any given opportunity. I mean, having that consistency is always a challenge for people in general, and I think if they don't connect that these are case studies in a bigger point, you know, that like, not just economic freedom. I've been talking about economic freedom kind of stuff just because that's what Farming in Fear is kind of about. But I mean, you know, criminal justice issues are you know, every bit as important, more important in some cases. You know, free battles for free speech right now are I think actually, frankly, right now, if there was and I am going to start working a little bit more on this issue, but I mean, the stuff that we've seen happen with free speech in this country lately is one of the things that scares me the most personally. But I see everything as connected, and the reason that I see everything as connected is because I have that framework of understanding the broader philosophy, right? I don't have a good answer for you in that, like, I think that there are institutionally some things that kind of need to be in place. Some stuff that actually, talking about the Koch brothers, and one of the things that we get a lot of criticism for, which I think totally unfairly actually, is the amount of money that we have been spending, particularly recently, on trying to develop academic centers at colleges around the country, trying to you know, basically fund professors who are interested in studying classical liberalism, you know, capitalism from a free market, you know, bent. You know, philosophy professors doing things like Liberty Fund, which is, I don't know if you guys know what Liberty Fund is, but it's basically a get-together for professors where they have a book club, a high-level book club, where they read, you know, a lot of literature, current modern literature on economics and philosophy and political theory and stuff like that. And, you know, so I think you need that stuff too, right? Like, I think you need somebody out there, in addition to people like me, but you need also people who are willing to take those stories, and then, as I'm very fortunate to have this be a true story, to use these stories in their law classes or in their philosophy classes and things like that. I think I'm fortunate in that I've had some cases where, you know, law professors are using these films in their classes for junior and senior law students, so that they can start those conversations about property rights and about, you know, abuse of power, and particularly about how, you know, why what they do could mean something more than just, you know, collecting a fat paycheck as a lawyer, you know. So I like to see that happen too. I don't know where the perfect solution is, because honestly, like, society is not, you know, it's a loosely ordered thing, so it's so hard to tell where, you know, where that connection is going to come from.
Well, now I'm curious. Will's our new resident lawyer. He just passed the bar a few weeks ago. Will,
Awesome.
did you get any of these like types of arguments or videos or anything like that in your classes, or were you just taught how to make a fat paycheck?
Oh, no. There was a seminar class that I was in where it was, the topic of the seminar was health law policy, and I ended up, for my seminar paper, writing essentially a legal anarchist manifesto about why all positive law is illegitimate. And as you can imagine, it had it went over in a very inauspicious way, I guess. My teacher did not give me an A in that class, but no, there wasn't. We certainly weren't exposed to you know, any really, I would say, fresh ideas or anything that could lead to too much constructive thinking, or, you know, creative thinking. So no.
I'll share an anecdote. I took a constitutional law history class, and the professor's actually a libertarian. He's a Hayekian. He recommended me one of like the book Invisible Hook, which was published by an anarcho-capitalist Misesian.
Pete Lee-
And what's that?
Yeah,
Pete Leeson, yeah.
Yeah.
And who he still insists isn't an anarchist, but Pete Leeson is absolutely an anarchist. But anyway, I was in his class, and I think we were talking about like civil rights and whether or not we needed the government to like mandate like racial equality, and I was like, we don't need the government's the one that's making miscegenation illegal and all this different stuff. And I was arguing with this whole class of progressives and socialists, just me against the world. They're just, I'm getting berated by these people, by myself. Finally, the class goes out. They leave the class. He has not said a word through this whole debate. Comes up to me quietly after everybody leaves and says, "Just so you know, I agree with everything you said." I was like, "Go! Are you kidding me, man? You just threw me to the wolves there." Even he doesn't, post that stuff.
Yeah, Chris. On that note, there is nothing that is more awkward or difficult to defend to an entire class that you're talking about in any situation than if you're talking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and to plant the seed of even to be like, well, I hate racism. All this, you have to preface it with so many qualifiers just to make you.
2015, but I gotta let you know that I'm anti-slavery.
Yeah, exactly.
Anti-slavery. That's right.
And the amount of oversteps into property rights that act did usher in. But the problem is getting the message across that it is a question of property rights and not just I hate the damn blacks and
I think that a lot of this stuff that always fascinates me on a human level, because I think that one, people have a really big difficulty separating like the Civil Rights Act, the 1964 Act, right? You should really separate a lot of pieces out of that and say, yeah, it's awesome that that you're saying that you can't segregate, like separate but equal is not okay and things like that. But you should be able to separate that from saying, but then also you should have the right to force people to interact with you.
Yeah, forced integration and things like that.
Of course, and so you would argue that if I remember correctly, I think Title II and Title VII are the ones that were directly violative of property rights, and
but nobody makes that distinction. And by the way, to pull it back to a little bit more of my area of expertise, I guess. There's a reason it's called the Civil Rights Act. There's a reason that this stuff gets labeled the way it gets labeled, and that it gets packaged in a certain way, and when you are successful in that aspect of it, and the thing that I really work hard against, I think, is doing anything where people could say, you're being a propagandist or whatever, because that, I think, is the death knell for anybody who wants to do something that you hope to actually have an impact. One of the things that I absolutely hate are the sort of red meat, preaching to the choir kind of pieces that are just giving you only the stuff that the guys that I already know will agree with it want to see. And instead, I'm always a little bit more interested in trying to find ways, and I'm not saying that I'm always super successful at it, but always want to try to find ways to package things and to present things to people who I don't think would necessarily agree with me right away.
Sorry, go on.
Well, no, it's just that to do that, you have to really think about your audience and think about what people care about. And, when you do something like the Civil Rights Act, you are literally saying this bundle of clauses of legal, language is all itself the one thing that we define as civil rights. You can't really break that apart afterwards without immediately being labeled against civil rights, right? So, it's a very clever way of doing that kind of stuff, which has always fascinated me a little bit.
We got into the final thing, Will, because I want to move into some wrap-up because we're over halfway done. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah, and Fee did a series a series of wonderful articles, excuse me, about how the market was a great weapon against racism in the civil rights era. You know, I believe it was talking about bus fares and most of the southern cities where everything was going down, that they were integrating because of the profit motive far before there was actual state mandated uh, integration and all that. So, but yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Let me
No,
add, let me add one more thing there too,
Sure.
which is that if you go, I mean, I'm gonna plug my thing again, but if you go to honestenterprise.tv and you click back a little bit, you'll find No Van's Land, which, like I said earlier, is about Jamaican immigrants who started basically a commuter van system in New York. We didn't get into this, and I don't know if you guys have seen that piece at all, but the reason they started doing that is because they were being radically underserved in their communities in Queens and Brooklyn in New York. Like, basically, cabs wouldn't go out there, a lot of which based on sort of racial fears and things like that, because they didn't want to go to black neighborhoods or they didn't want to go that far out. And, I mean, this is 1988 New York City where people were openly, I mean, NYPD is still kind of that way, but I mean, just openly racist. And, they solved their problem using basically entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And I always look at those kinds of examples and think, like, that was, first of all, that was happening. It was happening from the 1880s on, or really probably 1870s on. And it still happens today, and there are market solutions and solutions that free people coming together voluntarily can engage in that will solve all of these problems, and have, in fact, solved a lot of these problems. But I don't think a lot of people know about them,
Yeah.
So I think it's important to get out there and talk about those examples too.
And I haven't watched that documentary, but I want to now. Jeff, I haven't heard much from you tonight. I got a couple wrap-up questions just about some of your other recent TV. But Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add or ask before
it was actually what Chris kind of mentioned earlier. There's with these days, as opposed to 5 years ago, libertarian activism on things like YouTube, and I think the one thing that I've talked about before with Chris is that when you have people like Reason TV or Julie Borowski or Amanda Billy Rock before she kind of took her high, they had their own niche that reached a lot of people. Julie Borowski does a great job, whether you like her or not. She reaches a lot of people, but then you have like a kind of like an oversaturation with people just trying to also do the same thing, but it's kind of like I have nothing against it. Like, if there's 100,000 Pink Floyd bands, there's nothing bad about it, but it kind of takes away the value of the message. So I just want to think what your opinion on kind of the oversaturation of libertarian activism in videos that you kind of see, and how.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily see an oversaturation in the sense that there are so many people that it's inescapable. I think the bigger problem is that most of the time when I see this kind of stuff, people, coming back to the point, people are preaching to the choir most of the time.
Mm.
And I think what happens when you do that is you get an oversaturation in of quote, big fish in a very, very small pond. And they never actually break out of that area. And one of the things I always, I'd always like to see, and I always tell people when I'm having this conversation with people who've talked to me about trying to start their own things like this, is thinking about what are the areas that you could contribute beyond just your friends in the libertarian space. Like, if all you want to do is get your 100 or even 1,500 Facebook friends to watch your video repeatedly, but every time they try to share them with their non-libertarian friends, they just go, oh, God, no, I'm not going to watch this, then I don't really know what you're doing at that point, because then all we're doing is just talking to each other. And I think that has value in in certain mediums and certain contexts more than others. But if what you really want to do is actually be an activist, then you got to start getting out there talking to people who aren't, part of the in crowd already. So that would be my bigger problem, I think, is people who get so into the weeds that they don't end up trying to ever actually reach out to anybody else. That said, otherwise, I would love to see 1,000 times more people experimenting, trying more things, not just video, but comedy, music, and also within video. I mean, you could be talking about television, film, and things like that, in addition to YouTube, in addition to news. I mean, I think we've got a lot of people who are trying to do news. We've got a lot of people who do YouTube shows, not that many people who do very original or very interesting YouTube shows. So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to see way more of it, but I actually just want to see more experiments. I want to see more people trying different things. And, sorry, I'm kind of on a soapbox now, but like the other thing I would say too is, one of the things that I think people kind of get wrong, particularly in the political space, is they start with the idea that all that matters is the content, in terms of all that matters is what message I want to convey, and not how well it's made. Not, I mean, there's a lot of basics of production, quality audio, quality image. And quality image is not just not a grainy image, but also something with some sense of composition to it. Some, like, actually taking the time to light your own YouTube video if you're going to do that. That most people just aren't doing, and I'd like to see people take a little bit more effort on the art and production side, rather than just going, I've got this thing that I want to tell other people. I'm just going to get it out there that way. But actually think about how you're getting it out there. Think about how you could add to the creative space. Come up with more interesting ways of doing it. So I guess that would be I'd just like to see more.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I've thought about a lot. I focus so much on the content. That's what I care. I mean, like, I grew up. I watched. I was telling Jeff earlier, I've watched all 10 episodes of Milton Friedman's 1980 Free to Choose. I sit on YouTube and watch hour-long speeches, and Tom, I care about the content so much more than production.
I did too.
But at the same time, you're right. Like, that stuff doesn't cycle. It doesn't reach that many people. My other concern is people that, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of people that I'm not being critical of. There's a lot of celebritarians out there that are, I think, all flash, and then I wonder, if I had a conversation with them about economics, could they really even hold their own? And I think, man, probably not, and that kind of disappoints. So, where's the balance, I guess?
So I don't necessarily know. The balance side of it is sort of an interesting question to me, because I think that you need credibility, and credibility comes from, it comes from having that knowledge and being able to have those kinds of conversations. And if somebody did challenge you, like, you could actually make a really quality, profound argument. But that said, there's this thing that most people who are familiar with economics may know about, called comparative advantage.
Yeah.
We don't all need to be the host. We don't all need to be the writer. We don't all need to be on camera, right? Like, you can have a writer who knows that stuff backwards and forward, and have a great host, right? And a great production crew to do that kind of stuff, if that's what you want to do. But I also think there's a whole other way of looking at this too, which is through multiple tiers of what different kinds of mediums are good for. Podcasting is a content medium. I mean, we're having this conversation, and it can get as in-depth as any conversation's ever been within the allotted time, because all it is about the conversation, right? I'm in my room, like, nobody, like, it doesn't matter, I mean, I try to make it matter a little bit, but I mean, it doesn't matter that much what we all look like. What matters is what we're talking about. But if you are a host of a news show, on TV, it does actually matter what you look like. If you are trying to make a film, it matters what the film looks like. But I think all these things do different things, right? Like news and news style kind of YouTube shows are there for conveying information in what is hopefully an engaging way, right? But it's still about the information being conveyed. A film is more about conveying a feeling or an emotion to people, you know. So, like, I don't care if the movie, if a short film or feature film gets made. I don't care if the actors in it know anything at all about economics. What I want is, you know, a message or a theme that conveys, you know, a liberty-oriented concept in a way that's really emotionally engaging to an audience. But these are very different things, I think. And so I think part of it is just thinking about where people's comparative advantages really are,
Yeah.
and exploiting those. But yeah, I mean, I take your point though. I mean, you don't want somebody to become famous or well known for you know, advancing a set of ideas that they don't really understand.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess maybe that's my concern, but I'm always afraid to criticize them because, one, I could be wrong. They could be super knowledgeable and just not demonstrating it. And two, if they're doing good, who am I to complain?
Yeah.
So anyway, we're getting close to, we got about 10 minutes left, so let's wrap up. I wanted to ask you real quick, just some of your other videos. We mentioned the Remy videos. What all like videos and video series have you been involved in Reason?
Well, so I've done gosh, the Go Remy stuff I started doing a couple years ago. I don't do all of it. Meredith Bragg and Austin Bragg do a lot at Reason. Remy's a buddy of mine. We end up doing well. He's a buddy of mine from doing this kind of work, but we started actually on the Go Remy channel, not through Reason. But I've done a bunch with Reason. Most recently, actually my favorite one that didn't do as well as some of the other ones, it's still doing okay, but is I Need a Hashtag, which definitely check that out if you haven't seen it. I did a thing about the healthcare system called the Healthcare Mash at Halloween like 2 years ago, stuff like that. But those are really fun, and I would do that kind of stuff all the time if the ideas were good and I could, you know, just do that full time. But
are these other people's ideas that you're just taking your productive capabilities into, or are you the creative brain behind it to begin with?
So those are almost invariably Remy. Because, you know, they're typically music videos where, you know, like he'll have the idea and write the song, and then I'll do the production part. But then it does really become pretty collaborative, because what ends up happening is, you know, we shoot almost all of that stuff green screen and sort of figure it out on the fly as to how we're going to do that. So it usually ends up being me coming up with you know, all of the backgrounds and design and the sight gags and stuff like that. Remy and I will talk about in advance, but a lot of times that's just me doing, you know, going through doing the work. I'm doing a Learn Liberty piece with Remy right now that is also Star Wars themed, where he, and this was his idea, was to have him on screen with R2-D2, and R2-D2's like periodically making jokes throughout this piece, and so that part, that's like the essence of like Remy's idea. Like I'll be on screen with R2-D2, but then it's obviously up to me to figure out how to make that happen. The stuff that I have a lot more direct control over tends to be documentary work. Obviously, a couple years ago, I did this Liberty.me show, very short-lived thing there, but. And then going back, you know, I started, I moved to D.C. to work with Mary Catherine Ham at the Daily Caller, which has since become kind of different from when I was there. But just to do kind of comedy videos and stuff like that, I ended up interviewing every stupid national politician there was at the time, and kind of burnt myself out fairly quickly on that, and moved to the Koch Institute, where I started doing economics education pieces, and now, fortunately, a lot broader range of things, ranging from PSAs and sort of advertising pieces to mostly what I try to spend. I don't know if I spend the majority of my time on it, but the majority of my energy on documentary projects, like I was talking about. And recently we just, at the beginning of November, the Koch Institute hosted what I think is effectively the first transpartisan, nonpartisan, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but like massive criminal justice reform summit. We had 550 some people there. Well, we had 550 people, I think, register, and maybe 525 showed up. For a room that only held 350, we were not expecting that many people. But and I did some pieces for that. So I do a lot of that kind of stuff, and then I'll do a lot of sort of side gigs whenever I can. But my team is growing at the Institute, so for the last couple of years, it's been harder and harder for me to take freelance work, which is why I pretty much only do it with Remy anymore, because we just have a really good time doing it. So
yeah, sounds like a good problem to have.
It's a great problem to have. There's no man.
All right. We got 5 minutes left, so we really need to close up. First, let me say, you have my favorite background out of everybody we've interviewed so far. I've been distracted by this the whole time I've been talking to you. You're a mega nerd, and I love it. I've been looking at it. Just flipped over to Jeff. Stop triggering your mic because I want to point out stuff. You got Black Spider-Man and yoga back there. I'm such a comic book nerd. I just love that. I'm waiting for you to just get rid of those awards and put more superheroes up there. That's what I was. So I love it. I've been trying to figure out half that. Yeah, I've been trying to figure half that out, half the interview. Okay, so last question. I pre-warned you for this. I like to get a book recommendation from everybody. You know the list that we've already had recommended. So give us a new one.
I'm going to give you a non-Liberty book, because
that's fine.
One of the things I really want, and because I mentioned it earlier anyway, it's called 3 Uses of the Knife. And it's a book about creativity and writing by David Mamet. I'd highly recommend, for anybody who's interested in thinking a lot more deeply about aesthetics and art and how to move people with art. I think that I want to give you that recommendation, because you probably get a lot of just political books and idea books, but But it's the one thing that, and man, it's come up a little bit in our conversation, and I want to reiterate that, like, we have so many people who come into this space as political scientists and economists and whatever else, lawyers. Mm-hmm. We have barely anyone who actually comes at it from an entertainment background, from an arts background. And I think it makes a world of difference, especially if you want to be that activist who gets out there. And I'm not saying you have to go to school for it. I mean, I'm a video producer now. I have 2 music degrees, so it's not. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you have to start there, but get serious about it if you want to get serious about it. And I think David Mamet's it's a good place to start. That book is a great book. And if you're into editing, I guess I'll throw out a bonus recommendation of Walter Murch's In the Blink of an Eye, which is about film editing. Walter Murch, I don't know if you guys know who Walter Murch is, but, well, I mean, he edited Apocalypse Now and some of the Star Wars movies, and huge, just, giant of that industry.
He's not the one responsible to all the PowerPoint transitions in the new Star Wars, is he? That was George Lucas, I think.
Was not in the new Star Wars.
Okay. So I just recently rewatched those with a friend of mine, and we're just laughing at the terrible transitions. He's not that. He's better than that. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. No, like I said, like Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. You can't sell that short. Okay, cool. So we've got 2 minutes left. Let me plug the only 2 shows coming up after this one this week. That would be tomorrow at 8 p.m. There is the Future of Freedom show with Jacob Hornberger and Scott Horton. They're going to be discussing some of the current events going on in regards to Liberty, of course, the ongoing theme of anything with Liberty.me. And 2 hours after that at 10 o'clock, Jeff Tucker is going to interview Alex Norrit. I do not know how to pronounce that, but if Jeff Tucker's interviewing, it's going to be interesting. He's always got phenomenal insights and wonderful guests. So those are coming up tomorrow. That's going to end out the Liberty.me shows shows for this week, so everybody should check them out. We will be back here next week with a Bernie Sanders supporter. So we've tackled Bernie Sanders once before. This time, we're going to have somebody that actually likes the guy on, so it should be a very interesting discussion. So same time next Wednesday, 10 o'clock Eastern time for We the Individual Live. Sean, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an absolute blast to talk to you. Until then, we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks.